Welcome back to Route to Resilience. I'm Anupa, and today we're exploring a topic that we will all experience at some point, and yet very few of us are ever taught how to navigate it. Grief is personal and it looks different for everyone, but resilience doesn't mean getting over it. It means learning to tend, honor, and integrate grief into our lives with compassion, clarity, and courage. I'm so honored to be joined today by Nina Rodriguez, founder of Grief and Light. Nina creates space where loss, reflection, and resilience meet, helping people explore grief, honor their experiences, and discover ways to move forward while tending to the heart. Nina, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so happy to have you on the show. It's a topic I've wanted to discuss for a very long time, so I really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Anupa. Thank you for having me, for that beautiful introduction. And I want to say hello to our audience today. Thank you for being here.
Just one thing that I want to mention for our listeners. This conversation might be quite heavy and it might feel quite raw for a lot of people, especially if someone's going through grief at the moment or any kind of bereavement. So I just want to remind listeners to take care of themselves while listening to this episode. So Nina, should we dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
I would really love to start with talking about you and what your personal journey is and why you started Grief and Light.
Mm-hmm. So let's take it back to, let's say 2019. That was my first introduction to grief on such a personal level. It was the loss of my brother, the unexpected loss of my brother. He was my only sibling. His name's Joseph. And he died the day after his 32nd birthday. And I had lost relatives prior to his loss, but that one felt different because the other losses were more extended family. We are a small family of four, so it was, my parents, my brother, and I. So to lose one member, it just felt incredibly devastating. I mean, to lose one member, regardless of your family size, is devastating. It just felt so incredibly disorienting. And prior to that, I know people grieve, I know people pass away, I know we get sad and all the things, but it's not something you think about how deeply it impacts your life until you're actually in that space. So back then, I was working in real estate in Miami, post-COVID market, which was booming. We had business. I was working late. It was a Wednesday. Actually, this is the day prior. I leave work. I actually got a property under contract. My husband comes, picks me up. It was my brother's birthday, and I told my husband, hey, I'm having this inkling to go visit him today. Do you mind if we drive up? And drive up was an hour north. So this is after work. You're tired. You just want to eat dinner, wind down for the rest of the day. But surprisingly, he said, yeah, sure, let's do it. So we could just be with him on his birthday. We had plans for the weekend to be with him, but for whatever reason, I just felt a really strong urge to go there that day. And I'm so glad we did, because that was the last time I got to see him in person and hug him. We actually met, our parents actually met us there, and an uncle, and we had an informal birthday celebration, which was lovely and a great time together. The next day, he was supposed to take care of our uncle's dog. He was a 17-year-old Dachshund, so this very old little dog with all the teeth falling out. He's just very old. And my uncle was going out of town for a conference. He asked my brother to take care of the dog, and my brother's on his way there. He FaceTimes me on his way to pick up the dog. It's around 6 in the evening here, and I remember the golden glow on his face, right? And when I saw the golden glow on his face, the thought occurred to me that he looks angelic. And that's not a phrase or an expression or a description I use. I just remember thinking, oh, he looks so angelic. And that was it. I remember my dad called me. He said the words that I won't say because it's still very hard to say them, of what happened. And my world as I knew it, our world as I knew it, completely came crumbling down in that second. I made the hour drive north again. I remember there was this huge full moon, and I was so angry at the moon because my mind was trying to grasp at what the heck was happening. And as I did that, as I stared at this moon, I said, it's your fault. It's your fault. You did this. Like, trying to make sense of all of this. And I remember thinking, what is happening? What is happening? What is happening? In that drive, something in me disconnected. And I think that's where my curiosity, looking back on it in the moment, of course, you're not thinking of any of this, but looking back on the experience, that is the moment that I said, oh, I'm dealing with something, a new life experience, not just the loss, but what is this thing that I'm feeling? It is the most powerful feeling I've ever felt in my life. It feels incredibly disorienting. I don't know what's happening. I don't know, I just don't know left from right now. So to fast forward a bit in terms of, this is end of 2019, before we knew about the pandemic and all the things, right? During that time, I remember thinking it felt like fear. It felt like, who is going to die next? Are we going to be able to survive this? Can you die from grief? What are these feelings I'm having? It's like emotions you've never even felt before or even knew were possible, complex, layered, all the things. So one day I'm walking in the hallway at my grandmother's house, and I remember feeling like I was having what I imagine a heart attack would feel like, right? To the point that I put my hand on the wall to sustain myself, and I said, oh my gosh, can you die from grief? And I searched, and I found the Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, which is broken heart syndrome. And I found this Harvard study on broken heart syndrome and how essentially a Takotsubo is an octopus Japanese trap. And when somebody's in deep grief and deep sorrow and experiences some shocking trauma, the heart, in response, the system is overflowing with cortisol and stress and all the things, and the heart starts pumping in a way that I don't remember if it's the left or right ventricle, I'm not a doctor, but it reshapes and it contracts in a way that it resembles an octopus trap. And this can cause some kind of, heart issues, if you will. I'm, again, not a doctor, so this is not medical advice. This is just me doing research at the time. And to my understanding, it's something that you can recover from, and, your body stabilizes afterwards. Could take a few weeks, but in very severe cases, especially if somebody has a comorbidity, it could result in a fatal incident, right? So I said, oh my gosh, adding insult to injury, this grief thing, which already, life has been destroyed as I know it. This grief thing kind of adds another layer of something that we need to navigate, and that is incredibly disorienting. And how do you do this? It had been a few weeks. I called my friend, one of my best girlfriends. Her mother had unfortunately passed away 10 months prior. And I call her for guidance, and I ask her, how long does this last? Because I need it to go away. Like, when will this go away? And she says, oh, honey, I am at the grocery store right now in the baking aisle. I have a baking sheet in my hand. It's around the holidays. And she says, I'm going to bake cookies with my kids. And I am just bawling in the aisle by myself because I miss my mom. This is 10 months grief. It's a lot longer than you think. And I remember her words really sent a chill down my spine and made me pause. And I thought to myself, I can't take 10 months of this. Are you crazy? Like, I'm sorry for your loss, but that's not going to be me. I'm going to make sure that that's not going to be me, right? Looking back on that version of myself, I just want to give her a hug, because Lord knows grief lasts a lifetime, depending on how significantly one experiences the loss. It can last a lifetime, right? And eventually I'll talk about what is grief. But this type of loss, the person's gone forever. It's your person. So it's understandable that this is going to last as long as they're going to be gone, which is forever. So I'll take a pause there just to give you and our listeners an idea of where things were when they shifted and what happens then.
I'm getting chills. As you're talking, I'm getting chills. Just to give the listeners a little bit of context, Nina and I have had a conversation before this podcast, and we realised that we both have something in common, which is losing a brother. Nina's lost a brother, and I lost a sister, and they both passed away at 32. And while you were speaking, Nina, there was so many. I actually made notes because there were so many things that were coming to my mind about my own grief and where I want to explore more of what you've just been talking about. Um, the research that you did, well done for doing that because I think it's easy to avoid the feelings, but you dove right in and you wanted to know what was going on. One of the things that I want to mention here is that when you lose a brother or a sister, and anybody that's very, very close to you, it's not going to be obvious what is happening to you because you might have never ever experienced those intense feelings in your life. And it probably will take a lot of time to make sense of it. Would you agree with that, Nina?
Absolutely. And it did take a long time. I shortened a story here to like a few minutes, but this took months just to even get to that place of curiosity because as much as I would like to say I'm a researcher and all the things, I am a curious person by nature, which I think is a huge asset when you're navigating grief, just to approach it with curiosity. And the first few weeks, you're just trying to survive. Like, you're just like, did I eat today? Did I drink water today? Did I shower today? Like you don't know what is happening. And on top of that, I was really concerned about my parents. I was worried that like they wouldn't be able to survive this. So I was like, are they going to be okay? Is my family going to be okay? What is happening? So it's a really disorienting time, especially those early weeks and months.
Well, there's no book to say that this is what grief feels like, and you don't know what life is like without that person. So, from what I experienced is that I had to learn and relearn a lot of things. I describe my life as before Nim and after Nim. So that's my sister's name for all the listeners. And Nina's nodding here. So you know exactly what I'm talking about here. You actually become a new person because then you have to create a new self to navigate what you're dealing with. And the research that you did, I want to go back to that because I remember feeling a lot of anxiety when my sister passed away. Extreme amounts of anxiety to the point where I had panic attacks going to the shop to buy milk. So I just want to put that back to you, Nina. Is that something that you experienced? And when you did the research, does that explain the feelings that I was having?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And there's a clear before and after in grief. And let me preface the rest of the conversation with this. Grief is a normal human response to loss and life-altering change, right? So it's how we respond to loss and life-altering change. Things that kind of take the rug from underneath us, that our foundations, our understanding of life as we know it, shifts usually in a moment, right? It is not just related to the death of a person or a pet. I do want to bring pets in there because pet loss grief is very real. And it could also be job loss, life experiences, divorce, losing a home. Like in the States here, we had recent fires in California where people just lost their homes, like hurricanes, all the things that happen that really shift our sense of safety, our sense of identity, and our sense of security and how we move forward. So I want to preface it with that. The part that surprised me, and it sounds like it surprised you too, is how incredibly physical grief is, right? I thought grief, from my limited understanding at the time, was emotional. And it's something that with a little bit of mindset work and breath work, we could just navigate it, and it's going to be rough and bumpy, but we'll be okay. I very quickly learned that it's incredibly physical. And I would dare say if I were to look at a pie chart and divide it up in like sections of what comprises grief, I would say the biggest chunk would be physical. And that's something that, like you said, I had to unlearn, I had to relearn. And I forgot the phrase you used, but you said something like rebuild ourselves in the after. that is so accurate. And also the pieces with which you would have rebuilt yourself or prefer to rebuild yourself are no longer available to you. So there are parts of you that will have to grow in time that you in the moment don't know exist, don't know are available to you, and they will come in time, right? So that's part of why it's so disorienting, because who you were in relation to that person or pet or situation is no longer. And it's not something that you can like control, alt, delete, and like undo. This is permanent. And that permanency is incredibly difficult to navigate, to process, to integrate, to accept, to move through and with. So yeah, absolutely. Panic attacks. My grandmother, her face broke out in hives. And at the time we couldn't put it together. And it was for weeks. She went to the doctor, all the things. And they were like, could this be related to grief? And sure enough, it was her physical reaction, all the cortisol streaming through her body, manifesting itself as hives. And, people have weight gain, weight loss, sleeplessness, they feel nauseous, dizzy, all the things. And if we're not aware that this is tied to grief, and if we don't have the understanding of how to move it through your body, then we could think something is really wrong with us in terms of, being ill or something else.
I'm really glad that you explained how grief showed up for yourself, and also I've mentioned how it showed up for me. You've explained how it showed up for your grandma. I think it's really important to make that distinction that it's not going to be the same for everyone, and everyone's going to deal with it very differently. So thank you for explaining that. That was going to be my next question. So I think it might be quite important to, at this stage, talk about, well, how do we navigate this then? Because it sounds so complex, it sounds so intense, and it's different for everyone. So what do we do?
What do we do? That's like the bazillion-dollar question. There are some general things that could be helpful, but I want to preface it with, it depends on your circumstance and your type of loss, right? Because the grief of losing your grandmother at 100 who lived a full life and died peacefully may or may not be as traumatic as the sudden loss of a sibling when you were just celebrating their birthday the day prior, right? Or a loved one, a mother to cancer, let's say, seeing their slow decline. You see, so how the person passed, how the event happened will add layers to your grief. So if it was a traumatic experience, you will have to deal with the grief and the trauma. And there's a caveat that all trauma carries grief, but all grief does not carry trauma. Sometimes grief is gentle and light, and you grieve for a little bit, and it's understandable, and then life goes back to feeling normal. That's not necessarily the area that we're talking about here. We're talking about the one that rearranges our sense of self and how we show up in the world. So that's one element. The second element is, what resources do you have available to you, right? Are you surrounded by people who are saying, Anupa, you need to get over it. You need to move on. She would have wanted you to feel better by now. She would want you to forget about it and live your life. And as well-intended as that sounds, those platitudes are incredibly harmful to the person experiencing the loss, right? And do you have community? Do you have resources? Do you have people who are willing to talk openly about this with you? Do you have the ability to educate yourself or lean into your curiosity? All of this will impact how to grieve, right? I was lucky enough that my family was very open about talking about it all the time. I know that there are families that refuse to talk about it. They put the pictures away. They make it seem like the person never even existed. And if you're somebody that wants to talk about it and you live in that kind of, let's say, family or context, how you experience your grief matters and will be impacted, right? So prefacing the how with all of these elements, and this is why there's no blanket statement, right? So the easiest way for me to answer this question is, in the moment and in the stage of your grief, because early grief is not the same as 1 year grief, 2 year grief, 3 year grief, and beyond, right? It shifts over time. What is helpful? What feels helpful to you in that moment versus what feels unhelpful to you in that moment? So putting it very simply, because also grief brain is a real thing. You're overwhelmed. You don't have time to be like researching and finding all these things. So in this moment, what feels helpful to you versus what doesn't feel helpful to you, right? This could look like going for a walk outside, if that's what you need, being in nature, right? Talking to a friend, sitting with your puppy or cat or pet or whatever, drinking a glass of water. Sometimes it is so small, the way we support ourselves, it is so small we miss it. We think we have to be doing this grand thing. And I would dare say grief is an invitation to slow down and to turn inward. And it's really in that slowing down that you start learning what it is that you need. Sometimes we don't even know what we need, but you can hear it better when you slow down and take the smallest, tiniest, most accessible next step forward, right? That would be a how, especially in those really tough days. Also, shortening the timeline horizon. We have a tendency to think, what am I going to do from now on? What's going to happen next year? Do I have to sell the house? All these big decisions. And my invitation is to reel it back and come back to this present moment. You are not the person that needs to make that decision yet. So don't worry about that person yet. For now, what are you doing today? What are you doing this afternoon? What are you doing tomorrow? And then keep it to this tiny set of decisions, because the world is incredibly overwhelming. The other thing would be to not should on yourself. And this is something that I learned myself. And also, I don't know if you're familiar with Lisa Kefauver of, she has a podcast and a book, but she has a whole thing on not shoulding on yourself. We have this tendency to believe that we should be doing something, we should be doing better, or we shouldn't be doing this, or we shouldn't be feeling this way. Remove all of those and get very honest about what is without judgment. So I am feeling awful, and this is lasting way longer than I expected. And maybe there is a lot about this grief and loss and navigating life after that I don't understand, and that's okay, right? I call this the of course effect. So, of course you're feeling that way. You just lost one of the most important people in your life. Of course you are having panic attacks going to the grocery store. This is incredibly disorienting to your nervous system and your mind that are working overtime, not only to make sense of this loss, but to support your body and to process a new way forward. Of course it feels dysregulating. And do we feel the difference when you say that, when you hear that? Instead of thinking, oh my gosh, now I have to be on anti-anxiety medications, which whatever, if people need that, that's fine. I'm not saying it's not. But it's more about giving ourselves that grace to experience life as it is without having the added pressure of, now I need to fix this other thing. Now I should be doing this, and having that inner guilt. So that inner experience of guilt and shame and stress and worry. There are two sides to grief, or to the grief experience, if I could separate those for people. This would be one key takeaway that would be incredibly helpful. It was to me. I learned this from Megan Devine. She's the author of It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And I took her course in grief care, because one thing I learned as I navigated this is that my experience of grief is not everybody's experience of grief. So I had to educate myself on the language. That's really important, having the language of grief, and how other people may experience grief. And she broke it down in the following. There's the pain and there's the suffering. The pain is the set element, the static element. So your person died. There's nothing you can do about that. Like, you went through this divorce, you lost your home. There is no undoing this. There will be pain related to that. That pain is normal, expected, so we tend to it. We tend the pain. The suffering is the dynamic element, the adjustable element, and the elements that are under our control. So if you have, let's say, you lost your person, and then you're like, I shouldn't be feeling this way. It's been 2 years. Why am I still sad? Da, da, da. All this mental chatter, the what ifs, the regrets, the anxiety, all of these things. If we could show ourselves enough grace to lower the volume on those, and if not, get rid of them altogether, that would be amazing. So we can focus on tending the pain. That would take off immense weight off our shoulders in the way in which we navigate life after loss or life during loss, because anticipatory grief is a real thing. For example, caregiver grief. Your person hasn't passed yet, but you're already experiencing the loss. Loving somebody with addiction or suicidality or mental health issues, seeing a loved one's health decline. So all of this. And instead of being harsh on yourself on top of everything that's already happening, you turn down the volume on the suffering. You can then spend your energy on tending to yourself, the pain, and finding the next immediate step forward.
Thank you so much for that, because sometimes it feels like you need permission from someone to say that you can take care of yourself, you can slow down, and there is no should.
Yes.
I know for a fact that when I experience grief in all of those forms that you've just described, because, we've established that grief isn't just losing a loved one, I go into hyper productivity mode because I think that's what I should be doing. So I really appreciate that you're giving people that permission to take the time to feel their grief and to know that there's an incredible amount of pain that they're feeling. But let's talk about time and how grief can show up over time, because I know that there's going to be birthdays that come up when you think about that person and you'll grieve. There'll be times when there'll be a happy occasion in your life. So, for example, I got married in August last year, and I felt an intense amount of grief because my sister wasn't there. My brother-in-law, who is very tightly connected to my sister, and of course he passed away in November, and alongside feeling the grief for him, I felt an intense amount of grief for my sister too. So let's talk about time and how grief will show up time and time again, and how we should prepare for that.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm deeply sorry for your losses. The way that one loss can unearth grief that has been either forgotten or, beneath the surface. So, for example, the loss of your brother-in-law probably unearthed a lot of grief related to your sister, like you mentioned, and also because life happens, it's this and that at the same time. Congratulations on your wedding. So it's all of it at once. I say grief is not this or that; it's this and that. If I could sum up the grief experience, it's about living in the and, where both things are true at once. And you mentioned joy and grief. I remember feeling early grief. It's easy to feel like you'll never feel joy ever again. Like it's just not possible. It's no longer accessible to you. And that is okay to feel in the beginning, because that's what life is at that moment. I would invite somebody, especially in early grief, to be open to the idea of what I say, cracking the door open to the possibility of joy and the possibility of change. Grief time. I have an episode about grief time, our perception of grief time. Here in the States, we have the reference of when 9/11 happened, the Twin Tower collapse in, 2000, I think it was, or 2001. And so I call it the 9/11 moments, right? where people ask, where were you on 9/11? That was more than 20 years ago, but you remember exactly what you were doing, exactly what happened, exactly what you were feeling, and maybe even what you were wearing. But if I ask you, Anupa, what did you have for lunch last Tuesday? Unless last Tuesday was a special day, I don't know, I can't remember, I would have to think about it, right? So same thing goes for grief time. The experience that prompted the grief is such a marked moment. It is such a clear, defined before and after that becomes a quote unquote like 9/11 moment in your own personal life. And when you have somebody ask you about it, it's almost like you could relive it. And if there was trauma involved, probably even more so, right? Overall, we don't get over our grief, we move forward with it. And that's one thing that I've heard people say resilience is bouncing back. When you no longer have the person or that life available to you, there is nothing to bounce back to. I've heard a friend in the space, her name is Blair Kaplan Venables, say resilience is bouncing forward. And that makes more sense to me. I would define it as moving forward with your loss and without trying to get rid of parts that naturally define who you become today. So it is very understandable that on marked moments in your life, whether that's a joyful occasion like a wedding or their death anniversary or a milestone in your life, I'm sure you've had accomplishments that you wish you could have told Nim about. And just feeling like, oh, I can't grab the phone. Or maybe you went to grab your phone and text her or call her, and then that moment hits you like a bucket of ice, like, oof, your mind even forgets years later that this person is gone, right? Because they were such an integral part of our lives and our sense of identity. So grief time, I like to say, is not linear. Grief time is, especially in those early days, a week could feel like a year. A year could feel like both a blink and a lifetime. It's incredibly disorienting because of the way that our memories are stored, the way that our hearts recall our people, and the longing for those moments again. I spoke with another podcaster who said her mother had passed like almost 20 years ago. And she said, I thought I got over my grief. I thought I was good. And then my birthday rolled around this year and I lost it. And I think her words were, I regressed in my grief. And so she asked me, why did that happen? She was almost surprised and maybe a little bit angry. And I said, because you're a daughter missing your mom. It's okay. Even 20 years later, even 30, I've spoken to people who are grieving 40, 50 years later. They lost their sibling during young age. And then, as an older person, they never had the experience of, or barely had the experience of processing their loss or talking about their loss because it was more taboo back then. So then as adults, it shows up. Or I've heard situations where children lose their parents early. And then as adults, that grief, it's almost like it's brand new because they're processing it as an adult, as this other version of themselves in the context of, well, everybody else has their parents and everybody else's parents showed up for them. And here's my life. It looks so different. And that brings up all the things. So time becomes nonlinear. It becomes warped. We grow around our grief. I don't know if you've seen that image of the little ball in a container. It's not that the ball shrinks, ball symbolizing grief. It's that we grow around it. Our container, our capacity to hold the magnitude of the experience expands if we lean into grief, because you mentioned earlier that you put your head down in the work and you just got busy, which it's okay because that's a protective mechanism. Your mind says, I'm overwhelmed. I need to do something with this energy, so I'm going to focus on my work. That's okay. And I do believe it's important to dedicate time to being with your grief, understanding grief, processing how it shows up for you, because it's going to be different for you than it is for me. Grief is incredibly patient. It will be there waiting for you when you least expect it. It's usually in the moments that you get quiet, in the alone times, shower, right before bed, those quiet moments that something gets triggered and something comes up to the surface, something undealt with, something that wants to be witnessed. And grief needs witnessing, loving witnessing, empathetic witnesses. It needs expression. It needs integration. And it needs community. Because we, quote unquote, heal, and I use that word loosely. We heal in relation to others. So broad answer to the time one, but time is nonlinear in grief, and that's okay.
I think that one of the things that which we've uncovered here, which is really important to know, is that grief can go on for a lifetime, and it's most likely to go on for a lifetime, and it will hit you in the most mysterious ways, in the most unexpected ways, and maybe we can't always be prepared for that. But when we do feel that grief, it's a good idea to slow down, listen, be compassionate, and allow that grief to come up. The thing is that they're not here anymore, but we are, and our life still goes on. How can we navigate that grief through our lifetimes and not be consumed by it? How do we do this? Because the last thing I want to do is to be held back by my sister's death or my brother-in-law's death. It's not what they would have wanted. So how can we flip it on its head and just say, well, I'm going to use this to empower me instead?
That's a beautiful question. And the answer to that will depend on what type of person you are. There are 2 researchers who found 2 sides of the spectrum to the way in which we grieve. And some are instrumental grievers, and the other ones are, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the word, but essentially emotional grievers, right? So an emotional griever is usually the one that you see in the movies, like they cry and, very external. The expression is very overt and external and visible and obvious. Then the instrumental grievers tend to be more quiet and reserved, and they don't want to cry. And maybe they just grieve privately. And to somebody looking from the outside in, they may look insensitive. They may look like they're not processing their grief, et cetera, et cetera. So understanding what you're naturally drawn to. Are you somebody who likes to emote and express and talk about it? I was, I wanted to talk about, I created a podcast about it. Like I wanted to talk about it, right? Or are you somebody who is more quiet to the heart, who feels the need to keep it more private? And this is a spectrum, so it could shift. You could shift from one to the other at times. I would say search within to see which one you fall under, right? The first part is what I just named about knowing which style of griever you are, because that will define the path forward for you, right? I'm a firm believer that grief needs expression. That expression can be loud and external and outward, like creating a podcast about grief. It could also be very quiet to the heart. So whatever you do, do not keep it in. It needs an outlet. It needs expression. So if you're more private, that could be a journal. If you're more private, that could be crying in the car or the shower, wherever feels comfortable to you. If you are more of somebody who likes to express externally, find your people. And this is something that I wish more people talked about in grief. The people that you thought would be there for you often are either unable to or don't know how to show up in the way in which you need. And that's what we call a secondary loss, because it feels like we're also losing the people that we thought would be there for us. We live in the context of a grief-averse, grief-illiterate society, and most people do not have any idea how to show up for ourselves. They're incredibly uncomfortable. It's incredibly confronting to them. So our go-to resources so that we could feel safe and we could feel like this grief isn't taking over our lives completely often are not there. So I want to normalize that. So it puts us in a situation where we have to find community and people in other areas. We are also very lucky to live in a time where social media is a thing, right? And most of the community that I connected with, if not almost all of the community that I connected with, was through social media, through creating an account about grief and seeing, is anybody else feeling this, or am I the only crazy person who feels this way, right? You will very quickly find that there are millions of people going through the same thing. And when you speak up about it, you not only connect with others, and that me too-ness about it is incredibly powerful. There's a proverb, I think it's like a Swedish proverb. I'm going to butcher this. It's called, it says, grief shared is grief halved, or sorrow shared is sorrow halved, and joy shared is joy doubled. So that effect, that when we share, when we express, not only are we giving it somewhere to go, but we're also understanding at a deep level that we're not alone. So this could be social media, this could be engaging with your community. Somebody told me once, you have to be an active participant in your life. And that's a harsh thing to hear after you've lost somebody. But when you're ready, when that door opens, be an active participant in your life in whatever form that looks like to you, right? Community is incredibly important. Podcasts exist. Find ways to connect so that you deeply feel and understand that you are not alone. But going back to the beginning of our conversation, grief is incredibly physical. So I would add to that, more than the emotional, more than the expression, all the things, move it through your body, move it out of your body. Your nervous system is working so hard to regulate you, to support you, to keep everything functioning while there is stress and cortisol and all the oxidative things running through your body. Support your body through this so that it could do its job, right? When you're in deep grief, especially like I said, cortisol is spiking, do not do high intensity workouts because you're adding more stress to the body. Do gentle movements. So yoga, a gentle walk outside, being in nature is incredibly healing. But just understand that when the body starts feeling anxious, shaky, nervous, it is begging for movement. It is begging for you to support it. So nutrition, hydration, sleep, which could be incredibly difficult. Just don't be hard on yourself on that one. It's whenever you can sleep, that's good. Move it through your body, and expression. Whatever wants to come out, let it come out as it comes out without judgment, right? One example I'll give is a lot of people they express being less than thrilled to wake up the next day. I'll put it that way, right? And that could border in the topic of suicidality. One very gray area is that, and I think it was David Kessler, a lot of people are familiar with his work in the grief space, who says a lot of this feeling of feeling less than thrilled to be here is a deep longing to be with your person. It's not that you don't want to be here, it's a deep longing to say, I don't want to do this day again. Can we just go back, or can I just see my person? That feeling is very common. If that feeling starts becoming louder, heavier, darker over time, more persistent, then you may be talking about something else, and you may want to get support in the form of therapy, right? Being keenly aware of how your energy is moving through time, how your thoughts are moving through time, how your health is being affected over time, that awareness will help us grieve in a way that is healthy versus, like you said, letting it take over our lives, right? Once even your mind starts wondering, is this taking over my life? That is a great signal to go seek out some help. Go seek out community. Go to a grief group. Go to a grief-informed therapist. Not all therapists are trained in grief. That's something very important to talk about. Not all therapists are trained in trauma. So if you experience traumatic grief or traumatic loss, seek out a professional who's well-versed and educated in this world. And it's okay to ask them about their experience. But it begins with those small moments of tending, with those small moments of leaning in. Remember the pain and the suffering, so release the suffering aspect of it. Release the things that are under our control. Don't shoot on yourself. Be gentle with yourself. Interrupt those what-if spirals. Tend the body. Find community and express. And that will help you and sustain you in the long run. I would like to add to that one thing that was incredibly powerful, because it's okay to talk about all these things. And also sometimes it is the weirdest things that make you feel supported. So I learned about the concept of continuing bonds, which is death ends a life, but not a relationship. So you can have a relationship with your person, pet, whatever point of connection, even after loss, right? And what that looks like will be very different for everybody. In my case, if I were to be very honest about what was the most helpful thing in your grief, other than my curiosity, it was the concept of continuing bonds. Because I had dreams about my brother. I experienced moments of synchronicities that some people call signs that were just undeniable, those that make you pause and send chills up your spine, you know? These moments of connection that you can't quite explain, but you just know in your gut there's something there. So the invitation to not question that, because some people are like, well, I think I'm going crazy. I'm like, you're not. This is, if you talk about it with other grievers, they'll say, me too, and I experienced this, and me too, right? So allowing yourself to develop that language and point of connection with your person is incredibly powerful, because it feels like continuity. It looks so different. And yes, you grieve forever in these types of cases, right? But I don't want that to scare somebody to think that you're going to feel the intensity of those early days. That goes away, and you will remember them with more joy than sadness. The sadness, from my current perspective, and I don't know if in time I'll change my opinion on this, but with my current perspective, it's joy, grief. It's joy and grief coexisting. And I came up with this word, felicitresa. In Spanish, felicidad is joy, and tristeza is sadness. And I said, oh my gosh, it's a compound word. I feel joy, grief at all times. Like in my happiest moments, there's always an undercurrent of sadness, because man, there's somebody missing from here, and it's sad, and life looks not like what I ever thought it would. In the moments of sadness, there's an undercurrent of joy and gratitude for this person and the memories that we had, and the way in which I get to carry them forward with me. So it's that redefinition, that reframe is the word I was looking for, is that reframe of it's okay to feel joy, grief from now on. And over time, joy gets, when you lean in, the goal of quote unquote healing and grief is to experience and remember them with more joy than grief, than sorrow. And if you're doing that, that's perfectly okay.
There is so much awesome advice and wisdom. I'm having to make notes on the things that I want to unpack further with you. This is just amazing, Nina. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
One of the things that I want to emphasize from what you just said is that grief can feel extremely lonely, but you are not. There are a lot of people out there that are going through the same thing that you should reach out to. And I just want to remind the listeners, Nina's door is open, so I will put Nina's information in the show notes. If anyone wants to reach out to Nina and get support on their own grief, then please do, because as you can see and you can hear, Nina is incredible, and I just thank you so much for everything that the value that you've added is just incredible. Can feel lonely, and you can feel alienated, because you feel like you're the only one that's going through this, but there's so much help out there. So please do reach out. If it becomes too much to cope with, or even if you are coping, just reach out, have a conversation. There's no harm in doing that. The second thing I wanted to talk to you about from what you just said is that you talked about it's not the end of a relationship, it's a continuing relationship. And one thing that I want to point out is, just because, and we're going into a bit of spirituality here, just because the person's not here in physical form, it doesn't mean that person isn't here. And I think this is what you were trying to touch on, that there's an energy that you might feel from time to time, and there will be signs, as you mentioned. And I just wanted to ask you, Nina, do you ever feel like your brother is a bit of an angel and a guide? Do you ever feel that?
Thank you for that question, because it's one of my favorite aspects of this. That is, I only open the door when somebody's ready to, because we don't all share the same belief systems. And a caveat to continuing bonds is some people find that harmful. So if the person you lost is somebody that used to hurt you while they were here, or was abusive or something, would you really want to practice continued bonds, And the answer is it depends. I've worked with people that have we're humans, and we're complicated beings. And just because somebody hurt us doesn't mean that we don't love them. And that could be something that you work through continued bonds. Continued bonds does not necessarily imply spirituality. It just implies that we have the capacity to continue the relationship in the way that is helpful to us. And one example in a non-religious or non-spiritual way, and I'll get to the spiritual in a second, is that let's say you lost your parent and there was a lot unsaid and you needed a forgiveness from them, or you needed to hear something from them. One way to practice continued bonds is to, whatever it is that you needed, whatever question you had, like whatever unfinished business you feel, write it in a journal, set a timer for 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and respond to that question in the way in which you think they would have responded. And just write. And don't stop until the timer goes off, right? Because that way we get out of our own mind and we just allow it to flow. So that's one way of practicing continued bonds, because it's not that you're going to get the solid, they're not going to come back and say, Anupa, this is what my answer would have been like, but it's practicing what could have been and what could have healed. So that's one way to look at it. I love the spiritual side of it. I'm biased towards that, because there have been some experiences that, and they continue to be, that are undeniably a point of connection. Something as simple as, for the last 5 years, whenever I go to a hotel, the person checking me in, their name is Joseph. And this has not failed. I have pictures. I call my parents every time. I'm like, this is getting to the point where it's funny to me. It just happened last weekend. I was at a conference and the person checking me in, he's like, oh, I'm Joseph. How can I help you? I'm like, of course you are. And my brother's name is Joseph. So when I had a medical emergency in last year, I had an experience with anaphylaxis. I went into the ER and I wanted to, I was panicking. I'm like, that anxiety about my parents' remaining child. I don't want to die. Like something's happening. I was very terrified. They take me into the emergency room. The nurse says, my name is Joseph. And so I'm like, okay, little things that I just know there's a presence here. It's going to be okay. It's a language you develop, I believe, with your person in spirit. I don't label it as like angel or guide. If that's helpful to somebody, that's fine. It's just a point of connection with the energy that looks different now, but it's still their fingerprint. It's still very uniquely them. Messages that come through songs. I remember the first year after he passed, that Valentine's Day, my family got together. They go to a restaurant and the waiter comes running. He says, is there a Joseph in this table? And he was looking for somebody at a different table, but what are the likelihoods that he ran straight to our table to say, is there a Joseph here? And they might seem small, but in that moment, it makes you pause. It makes you pause so much. I've also had, I did a podcast with Dr. Joshua Black of the Grief Dreams podcast. I've had over 200 dreams with my brother. 95% of those feel very regular, like your everyday dream or every night dream. A handful of those were conversational, and I had messages that had real life consequences for me here in this 3D world, because I listened to the message in that dream. And one example I'll give, I had a dream that he told me in the future will require you to be flexible. That was the message. The future will require you to be flexible. This is right before the pandemic. This is like January, February 2020. I happened to get this opportunity at the time. Like I said, I was working in real estate to work for a developer. I was not ready. I go into the interview anyway, just to give myself the opportunity. They hire me on the spot. They say, you start tomorrow. And it felt so fast. And I was very nervous. The VP of operations said, hey, give yourself some time. Just test it out. And if you don't like it, you could change. Okay, no problem. when I go into the conference room, I look at the suite number and it was 119, but from the perspective that I was looking at it, it was 9/11. That's the day my brother died. So I was like, it feels like I'm supposed to be here. Okay. 2 weeks later, I'm completely overwhelmed. Grief is all-time high. There's the shutdown. There's all these things, but we were still expected to come into the office. Like, it was just crazy. And I said, I can't do this. And I remember that same person putting their hand on my shoulder and saying, take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. It's just going to require you to be flexible. When that man said the word flexible, that dream came flooding back, right? And I said, okay, I'm going to trust that there's something here. I'm supposed to be here. I don't know what it is. I'm just going to figure it out. Turns out the lockdown, all the things, the developer that I was working for at the time said, so long as I can help it, everybody's going to get paid throughout this whole thing, no matter how long it lasts. Just keep doing your job. We're going to make sure that you're safe and everything's going to be okay. At that time, my husband's job, they cut back salaries because the companies were struggling. But thanks to that, we had the opportunity to still pay our bills, still keep a roof over our heads, be absolutely okay, get out of debt, and be okay in the long run. So is that connected? Is that hard proof? I don't know. I choose to believe it is, right? So my continued bonds looks like leaning in and choosing to believe that there is something here, that he is guiding me in some way, that I am learning to communicate with him in whatever form his energy is now. And that I trust that whatever I feel in that moment, I don't question. I choose no longer to question it. I just say, I know you're here. Thank you for being here. And I talk to him in my heart. I say, I hope my love reaches you wherever you are. I hope you're seeing this. I hope our parents did this weekend. I hope you were there, and that's how I do it. And it looks different for everybody. There's no guidebook or rule book. It is just really powerful to be able to practice this in a way that feels true to you.
That's really beautiful. I have had similar experiences, and it's comforting. And when something like this happens in your life, it's nice to have those moments. But I also really, really appreciate how at the beginning of that question, you very responsibly distinguish that not everybody has had a good relationship with the person that has passed. And also there are things that are unsaid. And I think that was really responsible of you to do that. So thank you so much for being very inclusive of all our listeners. So we're coming to the end of the podcast. And if I'm really honest, I could continue talking to you forever.
Same. Thank you for the space to have these conversations. One of my missions is to foster a more grief-informed, hopeful world. I believe that grief work is one of the key callings of our time, especially with everything that's happening. Grief literacy, grief fluency, grief work is all life-affirming work. We tend to shy away from it because it's scary, it's new, it's uncomfortable. And my invitation to everybody listening today is lean in with curiosity. You will find, a lot of people ask me, how can you talk about this all the time? I would be so sad and it's so depressing. Of course there's sadness. We're talking about loss, right? And I get to meet people in their most vulnerable, human, and honest expression. And to me, there is no greater privilege. That is a beautiful way to meet people and to help guide them through one of the hardest times in their lives. You don't do this alone. We don't do this alone, right? And I would invite people to lean into that. When you do, you will find more joy, more life, a deeper sense of joy, I would argue, because things become so much more meaningful. Life becomes more meaningful, or can become more meaningful, connections and everything. It could go either way. There's people that the grief turns them the other way and it makes them hardened, calloused, and shut away from the world. So the invitation is to do the opposite of that. That's why the podcast is Grief and Light, because it's living in the and of life where you are constantly evolving, becoming, and grief can be an incredibly powerful source and energy and force and life experience that can help you become exactly what you came here for. So lean into that and believe the signs whenever you get them. It's so powerful to feel those points of connection.
So we're going to end the podcast by Nina helping people who are experiencing grief right now. And if they're feeling overwhelmed and stuck in their grief, Nina's going to give you one thing to encourage you to try today.
I'll give you one and a bonus. So one is really check in with yourself and ask yourself, what do I need today? What do I need in this moment? I think we often think about all the things we could do for others, all the things we should be doing, all the things we're not doing, but we forget to check in with ourselves and develop that language and that understanding of what it is that I need to be nourished in this moment, and do that. Another way to phrase that is, what would feel expansive to you in this moment? What would light you up in this moment? And lean into that, because it is those moments of joy that give our nervous system the joy and mindfulness. I'm using this as a broad term, that give our nervous system that sense of safety that we so desperately need when life has been turned upside down, essentially. The bonus one I would say is listen to the podcast. That's why the Grief and Light podcast exists, to give people frameworks. Root to Resilience podcast, that's also why these podcasts exist. These conversations help us reframe, feel less alone, and help us understand what is happening through the experience of somebody else. And that is incredibly powerful. I'm saying this as a podcaster, but also as somebody who leaned into podcasts myself. They're an incredible resource for somebody grieving. So if this feels heavy, find an episode that resonates, listen to that, lean into the wisdom of, I mean, you're already doing that here if you listened here, but continue to do that. And develop a practice of checking in with yourself of, what do I need in this moment? What do I need today? What do I need in this moment to feel supported?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's such a great way to end the podcast. And as I said earlier, I will share all of Nina's information in the show notes. So please do take a look, have a listen to Grief and Light podcast, and reach out if you're needing some support, because as you can tell, Nina is the perfect person to reach out to if you're dealing with something so heavy like grief. So thank you so much, Nina. Thank you for your honesty and compassion today. And I know that your insights are going to be so useful and valuable for so many people. So thank you.
It has been an honor, Anupa. Thank you for the space to share it for all of you. Thank you.
To our listeners, grief isn't something to fix. It's something to honor, to tend to with care, and to integrate. Because no matter how painful, it rarely disappears completely. So lean into your community, be gentle with yourself, and hold space for your emotions. So take care of yourself, and remember, resilience is your superpower.